The Amazon Conservation Team partners with indigenous and forest communities to protect South American rainforest using a strategy that integrates support for territorial management, indigenous governance, intercultural and indigenous education, and traditional medicine. Collaborative cultural mapping has been an integral part of this strategy since the inception of the organization, and ACT has guided over 50 tribes through territorial mapping initiatives in Suriname, Colombia, and Brazil. Indigenous mapping helps contribute to a number of important goals, including recording traditional knowledge and land use, inventorying natural resources, informing the creation of territorial management plans, and demonstrating land usage, which helps advance land claims and also mitigate external pressures. The specific project I'll be talking about today is with the Kogi Indigenous group of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in northern Colombia. At a height of 5,700 meters, close to 19,000 feet, the Sierra Nevada is the highest coastal mountain range in the world and the only glaciers in the Caribbean. This unique geography and the presence of a rich mosaic of ecosystems and endemic species makes this one of the most irreplaceable mountain ecosystems in the world. The Kogi, who have a population of approximately 20,000 people, are one of 4 indigenous groups in the Sierra. The Kogi have historically been a very reclusive group and have maintained many of their cultural traditions. They are one of the most cohesive and well-organized indigenous groups in South America, if not the world. So this is a map of the Sierra Nevada with the indigenous reserve shown in the middle. The Kogi Reserve is the yellow area to the north. But these reserves cover less than half of what they consider to be their ancestral territory, which is delineated by a ring of sacred sites shown in the white pins, which when connected is referred to as the black line by local indigenous groups. Unfortunately, the Sierra is facing extreme threats from external pressures. This map shows active mining titles, which are the darker shade of red with the black outline, as well as pending mining applications shown in the lighter shade of red. In addition to mining, there's extensive exploration for oil and a booming tourism industry that's resulting in the construction of resorts all along the Caribbean coast. In response to this, the Kogi have been diligently working to reclaim their ancestral territory and protect their sacred sites. They have been highly motivated and organized in this effort, using funds received from the sale of coffee and other cash crops to help acquire some of these important sites. To guide the territorial reclamation process, the Kogi are seeking to improve their mapping capabilities so that they can better identify important sacred sites and document the condition. In May 2014, the Kogi governor, Santos, as well as Mama Shibalata, who is one of the Kogi elders and spiritual leaders, visited Mountain View for a Google Talk session, and following that, talked with Sean and Rebecca about the possibility of using Google mapping tools. Following those discussions, ACT and the Gadawindua Tairona Indigenous Association planned a mapping workshop for March 2015. The workshop was attended by a group of 7 Kogi that are part of the Indigenous Association's territorial team, as well as project coordinators and cartographers with ACT. The workshop began by talking about the goals of mapping and how it can contribute to the territorial reclamation process, and then we reviewed some of the basics of mappings like latitude and longitude and grid systems. We then reviewed Google Earth, showing the Kogi how to navigate the globe, create and edit data, and how to export maps. The team marked the locations of villages and sacred sites, among other data. We also reviewed how to use GPS units, which is technology that much of the team had used before. We also practiced using GPS units in the field to record the path of an aqueduct that is being built on a Kogi sacred site that they have recently taken control of. At the workshop, we also discussed the potential for using Open Data Kit on smartphones and tablets to collect information about the sacred sites. The territorial team agreed that this could be a useful technology, and we discussed the design of such an application that would respond to their needs. Following that, we have designed a pilot application that allows the Kogi to record georeferenced data and multimedia about their sacred sites. Using this app, the Kogi can record and photograph important cultural items, including sacred rocks, sacred lakes, and materials for ceremonial payments. In the Kogi worldview, the health of the Sierra depends on these ceremonies to reinforce spiritual connections between sacred sites. And this app also has a space for them to mark the spiritual connections between the different sacred sites. There's also options to record environmental information, including ecosystems and plant and animal species. Finally, the app allows a Kogi to document the condition of these sites, ranging from a state of degradation to conservation, and allowing them to record specific threats, including mining, tourism, and illicit crops and cattle ranching. The app was designed to be as accessible and intuitive as possible, using graphic symbology and also having the option to record audio so that younger members of the territorial team can interview and record the elders regarding their oral histories. This information can then be aggregated and loaded into Google Earth and other mapping platforms, which is the stage that we're currently working on developing now. The map on the right was produced during a trial run using ODK to record cultural information at a coastal sacred site called Haba Taniwashkaka. ACT has been working in partnership with the Ganawandua Tairona Indigenous Association and the Colombian government to protect this site, which was given a new protective land designation in 2013 when the Ministry of Culture declared it to be a site of national cultural interest. We are now in the process of incorporating this into the Indigenous Reserve as well. Using Open Data Kit, the Kogi recorded the names and background information of 6 Madre Viejas, which are old mothers, which are culturally and biologically important swampy lakes. They also documented that these Madre Viejas have a spiritual connection to a glacial lake at the top of this watershed. Using that information and data generated during the Google Earth workshop, we are working to compile an inventory of sacred sites and a map of the spiritual connections on the northern face of the Sierra. What you see is just a preliminary map, and we're hoping to scale up mapping efforts in 2016. This is just one example of how ACT is working to empower Indigenous communities with technology and mapping. And there's also active efforts in Suriname, Colombia, and Brazil to use this technology as well. Thank you.
So if they're writing names of places, animals, and myths, are they doing this in their languages? And do they know how to write this? Do they know how to write their language?
So most of the territorial team is familiar with Spanish. Much of the Kogi don't speak Spanish. Some of them never even leave the higher parts of the mountain. But the ones that have been chosen to participate in the territorial team are familiar with this technology in Spanish. But we also try to minimize the room for error by having, select multiple options. While there is a space for other, it helps to standardize some of the data collection.
Thank you, Brian. What are any lessons learned that you can share? What are the main challenges that you guys have faced engaging with this type of training?
Yeah, there are certainly some barriers to entry with the technology, some learning curves for some of the teams. Some of the older members of the territorial team had only basic knowledge of computers, so they weren't, left click and right click, for example, was one thing that we had to talk about. So, it's one of the lessons learned is definitely start at the basics, go from there. We explained everything from how satellites work to undersea cables, stuff like that they were quite interested in, which helped them get a more fuller understanding of how this information is being transmitted and used.
My question would be more related to the threats. You map the threat. Are you using official information or are you mapping with community information?
We're hoping to do both. So we started off with the official mining concessions, oil blocks, that kind of things from the Colombian government. But we also want to verify these things on the ground with the indigenous peoples, and especially how those things are affecting the indigenous sacred sites. So sometimes there may be a mining title, but maybe they haven't started there. So we want to have the Kogi in the field recording this information as they see it and documenting it themselves.
Thanks, Brian. Excellent presentation. Were there concerns the Kogi had about revealing the location of their sacred sites in a more broad public context that you had to manage?
Yeah, security is an issue. Like right now, we're only showing them at a very coarse scale so that it's impossible to really identify where is what. But they also, one of their goals is to spread this message that this is happening, to try to raise awareness and gain support for the protection of these sites. But security is definitely an issue going forward as we begin to collect more data, some of which will be more sensitive than others, including old archaeological sites and things that could attract grave robbers or tourists. We're being very aware about security.
What was the biggest difficulty that the people have to learn to map, and how long did it take? And after the secret place they mapped and published are no longer secret, this is a problem for the Indian people or not?
Well, yeah, the challenges are some of these learning curves to get used to the technology. We think we were only really starting this process, so we had this workshop. We need to keep following up with more workshops, which we have planned for later this year and early next year, to keep building their capacity to do this mapping. And yeah, regarding the the condition of it, that's something that's going to have to be continually monitored going forward as well.
Great, thanks so much, Brian.